Okay, let's unpack this. We're digging into some really high-stakes future gazing today.
We really are.
Our source material is this massive piece of global foresight. It's the National Intelligence Council's report, Global Trends 2025, A Transformed World.
And you have to remember when this came out, November 2008.
Right in the middle of the global financial crisis, the system was like actively melting down.
And that context is just, it's everything. Our mission here isn't just to, read old predictions. It's more like we're trying to reverse engineer how leaders back then saw the world changing.
So what were the critical insights? What were they expecting?
Well, we're extracting how that established post-World War II international system, the one with Western dominance, alliances, how that was supposed to morph into a global multipolar world by 2025.
And the report's core thesis is, it's frankly pretty dramatic. The authors stated, just flat out, that the old international system would be almost unrecognizable by 2025.
Yeah, and they stressed that this 15-year transition period would be, and this is a quote, fraught with risks. But there's also this powerful call to action in there.
The leadership matters part.
Exactly. Leadership matters because no trends are immutable. They weren't just charting a fixed course. They were giving policymakers a map, showing them where a decision could actually change the future.
Okay, so let's start with that tectonic plate shift they talk about.
Yeah.
The great power rebalancing.
Right. The single biggest driver they identified was this historic transfer of relative wealth and economic power roughly from west to east.
Unprecedented in history, they called it.
It really was the defining shift of that era. And at the center of it all were the BRICS.
Brazil, Russia, India, and China.
Right? And you have to think, coming out of the post-war era, all the financial muscle really rested with the original G7 countries.
The U.S., U.K., Germany, France, Japan.
Italy, Canada, they were, the gatekeepers of global finance.
And the sources showed the BRICS were just eating into that territory.
A fest. Oh, absolutely. The projection in 2008 was startling. They thought that these 4 emerging nations would collectively match the G7's share of global GDP sometime between 2040 and 2050.
And that's not just a minor adjustment. That's a fundamental restructuring of who funds and who builds the world.
Exactly. Suddenly, the decisions made in Beijing or Brasilia could carry the same weight as those from Washington or London.
And within that BRIC group, of course, China was the behemoth.
Yeah.
The report projected it would have the greatest immediate global impact.
World's second largest economy, a leading military power, all by 2025.
But the report wasn't just focused on China's money, was it?
No, not at all. They saw its influence extending into, well, every global choke point. By 2025, they figured China would be the largest importer of natural resources.
And the biggest polluter at the same time.
Right. That combination describes this incredibly powerful, resource-hungry engine whose needs would just reshape world markets and the environment.
And this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The ideological difference. It wasn't just a shift in economic power, but a real challenge to the Western liberal model itself.
That's right. You have emerging powers like China and Russia explicitly favoring this alternative model, state capitalism.
Which means the state plays a much more direct role in the economy.
An undeniable role, a prominent role in, allocating capital, directing investment, protecting national champions.
So why choose that path over the free market approach?
Well, it was about perceived stability and control. And state capitalism, which had been used pretty effectively by places like South Korea and Singapore, it just seemed to offer a faster, more protected path to development.
And then the 2008 financial crisis hits.
And that just accelerated everything. The sources note this profound irony that the crisis forced Western governments to step in. Think bank bailouts, massive federal spending.
So our own actions reinforced their argument.
It totally did. It inadvertently gave state capitalism this huge credibility boost right when the West was trying to champion its own model.
And with all this happening, the U.S. position was expected to change drastically. Still the most powerful country, but
less dominant, absolutely.
And less dominant meant less flexible.
It meant uncomfortable trade-offs. The authors believed that by 2025, the U.S. would face these agonizing choices between, say, domestic spending on healthcare and infrastructure.
And maintaining its expensive foreign policy and military presence.
Yeah, it was really the documented beginning of the age of constrained American power.
So that's the perfect pivot then. This economic expansion is directly connected to massive resource stress, the new transnational agenda.
Indeed. The rapid growth in the East, plus relentless population growth, It created impossible demands. The world was projected to add another 1.2 billion people by 2025.
And that would push the limits on energy, food, and water all at once.
And the numbers they had on water scarcity back in 2008 are genuinely alarming to look back on.
I mean, they're stark.
They are. In 2008, they found 21 countries, that's 600 million people, were already cropland or freshwater scarce. The projection for 2025 was 36 countries, impacting 1.4 billion people.
And climate change was expected to just make it all worse.
To severely exacerbate it. Crippling agriculture and water access, especially in places like sub-Saharan Africa, it's a forecast of profound stress.
And if that wasn't enough, there was this massive paradox in the energy outlook. The world had to transition away from oil, but it couldn't.
That is the dilemma right there. The transition was seen as inevitable, but the sources identified this critical failure in timing. They said flat out that all the non-fossil fuel tech at the time, solar, wind, whatever, it was inadequate.
Not on the scale needed by 2025.
Not even close. And they blame the systemic adoption lag in the energy sector.
Which is what, about 25 years on average?
Yeah, about 25 years for new energy tech to get adopted and actually make a difference. So even if you have the innovation, the infrastructure and the political will are just too far behind.
Which creates an incredibly volatile system.
Exactly, dependent on resources that are polluting and, geographically constrained.
Okay, so demand is up, resources are down, we're stuck in an energy jam. And on top of all that, we have demography, which the report shows is just diverging wildly across the globe.
It's like a literal split screen on age structures. On one side, you have the developed world, Japan, Western Europe, facing a pensioner boom.
Which means steep declines in the working age population.
Crushing fiscal burdens. Japan, for instance, was projected to have one senior for every 2 working age people by 2025. Think about what that does to Social Security and healthcare.
And the complete opposite is happening in other parts of the world.
Precisely. You have these youth bulges in sub-Saharan Africa and the core Middle East, and the report associated these huge numbers of young people with conditions that were ripe for instability and disaffection.
Because there weren't enough jobs to go around.
Not nearly enough. It's a recipe for internal chaos.
But the demographic section also had this surprisingly positive part, focusing on the role of women.
Yes, the report called women critical agents of geopolitical change. In the aging West, for example, getting more women into the workforce was seen as a way to mitigate the worst economic impacts.
And more broadly.
More broadly, the authors noted this correlation. Societies where women are more politically active tend to focus more on social programs, healthcare, the environment, and less on military confrontation.
A subtle but powerful driver for a less conflict-ridden world.
You could say that.
Okay, let's shift from these big predictable trends to the unpredictable high-impact shocks. The report used these fictionalized scenarios to show how the system could just violently break.
Right, and they were clear that core security threats remained. They worried about a nuclear arms race in the Middle East, for instance, driven by fears of a nuclear Iran, and, of course, terrorism.
With the terrifying idea that advanced tech like biological agents could put mass casualties within reach of these groups.
Exactly.
So let's dive into the scenarios. The first one, BRICS bust up, is this perfect example of resource nationalism. Well, gone kinetic.
Right, and what's fascinating is it wasn't about the U.S. versus China. It was about the rising powers turning on each other.
Over energy security, a direct result of that resource scarcity we just talked about.
The scenario builds on these strategic moves. India is modernizing its navy to protect its interests. China is establishing naval bases in Pakistan to safeguard its oil lanes.
And then the spark that lights the fire.
It's a localized military incident near the Gulf of Oman, but the consequence is immediate and terrifyingly global. Stock markets tank, and the price of oil spikes to over $300 a barrel.
Yeah, imagine that. Immediate global recession triggered by 2 regional powers.
And what's interesting in that scenario is the role they give to Brazil.
Right, they project Brazil as the neutral, trusted mediator. Why Brazil?
That's a great question. Their report probably chose Brazil because its foreign policy was relatively balanced. It wasn't directly involved in those flashpoints, and it's a resource-rich power itself.
So it could act as an honest broker.
Right, when the traditional powers couldn't be trusted.
Okay, so let's look at the second shock, the October surprise. This is a classic slow burn disaster where a long-term threat suddenly becomes a catastrophe.
And in this fictional event, the surprise is an extreme weather event, a massive hurricane or flood hitting Manhattan in 2020. This is the moment climate change stops being a debate and becomes an existential threat to the world economy.
And the really shocking detail.
It wasn't just the damage to the city, it was the damage to Wall Street's financial infrastructure. It was so bad, they were seriously talking about relocating the New York Stock Exchange to New Jersey.
Wow. The point wasn't meteorological, it was political.
Exactly. It was a blunt critique of that global growth-first mentality that just neglects essential infrastructure and climate adaptation.
Which brings us directly to the issue of governance. If major powers are fighting and climate is collapsing the financial system, who is actually running the show?
And that leads to the central governance paradox they identified. Multipolarity without multilateralism.
Meaning, everyone has a seat at the table, but nobody can agree on what to order.
Precisely. The existing institutions, the UN, the IMF, NATO, they were seen as large and cumbersome, designed for the Cold War era. They just struggled to adapt.
Creating this massive, dangerous global governance deficit.
Right. And while states are struggling to cooperate, power is also being pulled downward, away from the state entirely.
The rise of non-state power.
Yes. Businesses, tribes, religious organizations, and critically, transnational criminal networks. The report gave this chilling warning that some states could literally be taken over by these criminal networks.
But the section ends on a more positive note, right? The politics is not always local scenario.
Yes, this is a fantastic moment of optimism. It describes a shift where a coalition of non-state actors, NGOs, religious activists, middle-class citizens in China and India who were fed up with pollution, they basically wrest control of the environmental agenda from governments.
How do they manage that?
Through global communications technology, ubiquitous computing they called it. It allowed these groups to organize, share data, and apply targeted pressure all at once.
And the result in this scenario is pretty dramatic.
It is. A new, successful climate treaty gets enacted, and the UN General Assembly actually reserves 20 seats for NGOs with full voting rights.
That is a vision of global policy bubbling up from the grassroots.
A truly transformed world, one where state power is eroded, challenged, and circumvented all at once.
So what does this all mean? We've looked at the massive drivers predicted back in 2008, the power shift from west to east, resource scarcity, the disruptive power of conflict and climate change, and the rise of non-state actors.
I think the core tension throughout this whole deep dive is the accelerating speed of global change versus the lagging ability of our institutions and leaders to manage it effectively. The report is really an argument that you have to intervene now, even on distant threats, to change the trajectory.
Which brings us back to that energy transition. The report suggests a transition away from fossil fuels is inevitable, but the timing is the key uncertainty. Will it be abrupt and costly?
Leading to $300 oil and conflict.
Or will it be smooth and planned?
And given that framework, the recognition of an inevitable shift whose timing is being mismanaged, here's a provocative thought for you to chew on. If the world in 2008 was risking an abrupt fossil fuel transition because leaders failed to plan, what major structural change, maybe an AI or global debt or climate migration that is already widely seen as inevitable today, are current leaders failing to manage the timing of right now, risking a similarly abrupt and costly crisis in our own time?